farming, corporate America, city management, public education. My friend Don Keene has worn a lot of different hats and had a lot of different jobs. Join us today as we talk about how, although job opportunities led him all over the place, his faith was always his guide. All right, and welcome again to the Call to Lead podcast. I'm Colby Rich. With me today is my friend Don Keene. Don, why don't you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, your family, kind of what you're doing now, and just where you are in life.
Sure. Appreciate the opportunity. Was born in Sherman, Texas. Graduated a long time ago from Sherman High School. Got my degree at Texas A&M. I wanted to come back home. Wife and I moved back here. My wife, Carol, we've been married 41 years.
That's
Had
congratulations
3 daughters.
worthy right there.
Well, thank you. 3 daughters, 4 grandkids. Very blessed. Live out on the old family farm. My grandkids, some of them actually live on the farm with us. They're the 6th generation on the farm, so that's been a real blessing. My wife would tell you I never really figured out what I wanted to be when I grew up. I've been blessed to be able to do a number of different things in my, to earn a living, but she and I were blessed to be able to retire a couple years ago, and now we spend a lot of time. All 4 of our parents are still living. We spend a lot of time with them and time with the grandkids. Still do some farming and raise some cattle, and I serve as a shepherd for the Western Heights Church of Christ here in Sherman. So anything outdoors, camping, hunting, fishing, spending time with family, I'm all about that, and still enjoying life and learning what each day brings new to us.
So before we kind of get into, I want to talk about some of your career stuff and just where you've been and what you've done. But before we do that, I know faith is really important to you, and I know we'll talk about how that's kind of been a guide for you through all of this process. So tell me how you came to learn about Jesus and know Jesus.
Sure. I was blessed to be raised in a family of believers on both sides of the family. I grew up studying the Bible. Grew up with the Bible stories. Grew up going to church. Grew up going to Sunday school, and sometimes I think that's a good thing, and sometimes it may make it more difficult for us in some ways. That'll have its own set of challenges, I think. But I was blessed to grow up that way, and I think I was about 12. I decided, you know what, this is the real deal, and I need to make a commitment. Made Jesus the Lord of my life. I was baptized when I was 12. Been working at it and been appreciating God's grace and mercy, and being made whole by the blood of Jesus since then.
All right, and we'll come back to that several points in this conversation, I'm sure.
Sure.
So walk us through. So you went to Sherman High School, right? You graduated, and then ended up going off to A&M. What led you to A&M, and then what led you to the career that you chose?
I've always had a passion for agriculture, and honestly, I didn't have a lot of guidance. And I knew A&M was an ag school, and it was in Texas, and back then it was pretty affordable. So that's kind of how I ended up there. But looking back, I know God was all in that. That's where I met my wife, Carol. So I suppose that was the reason. And then graduated and just really wanted to come back home. So was able to come back home and kind of start my working years here back in Sherman. It was good to get back home.
So when you graduated, where did you, because you did engineering.
I was actually started off with Texas Instruments. I was in the area of planning, and the last number of years I was there, I was actually managing the worldwide capacity planning for the semiconductor business. It was a great opportunity. But again, a lot of times things that are blessings also bring challenges. I ended up spending a lot of time overseas in the Far East, Mexico, and a little bit in Europe. And I had 3 little girls that I finally realized were growing up without their dad. And I'm like, man, I just can't keep going this direction. And that was probably one of the first times in my life that I really felt like God was trying to tell me something, and I knew, I had to kind of get off that fast moving train. Otherwise, my daughters weren't going to grow up without their dad, and I didn't want that. So came back and just told my boss. I said, I just know in my heart I need to do something different. And a lot of people thought I was crazy, but I just knew that was what I needed to do, and spent a couple of years just taking care of some family things, doing some things that needed to be done on the farm, and then got an opportunity. I had a good friend, Joe Moore, over in Bells. He was a superintendent. He said, "Hey, I think you might need to consider public education." And what's crazy about it, I had been thinking that. I had been through some training at TI, and at one point in that training, he said, "Hey, we love you here, but the results of your test and all really kind of point you more of a people-oriented kind of thing." So I put those two things together and said, well, I think that's where I'm called. Long story short, I went to Bells, taught and coached there for 4 years, and then went back and got my master's degree and worked as the middle school principal there for a couple of years, and was very blessed. My wife and I were both there, and really enjoyed being there and being a part of the community of Bell. That's a special group of people.
Mhm.
Um, Got to a point where I had two girls in college at the same time, another one about to be in college. And one day I got a call from the city manager, Sherman, George Olson. He called me and said, "Hey, remember back in your TI days, some of the things you were doing for them? We kind of think we might need some help with some of the projects we got going on. Would you be interested?" And I'm like, "Well, okay, what does this mean?" But met with him and Robbie Hefton, and long story short, I decided to take that opportunity. Spent 9 years there at the city, worked with a lot of great people, learned a lot of valuable things, and I guess my last few years there was as the assistant city manager. And I knew my work years were kind of in, and I always kind of had felt tugged to get back into public education, get back in with the teachers and the kids again. Yeah, my wife had moved to Whitesboro and was working there, and I got a call from the superintendent there. He said, "Hey, we've lost our middle school principal to a tragic accident." He said, "I just thought I'd call to see if you might be interested in coming back and helping us." So by then, we were in a place where I felt like, I think this is a good time to go back, and spent my last 6 years with Whitesboro ISD as their middle school principal, and then I spent last couple of years as the assistant principal at the high school. So it's kind of crazy when I think back about it, but I'm really thankful. And I see God kind of at work through that whole path, and taught me a lot. And I wouldn't trade all those different experiences for anything.
So from the school to the city back to another school district, I know that you kind of had people kind of called you away. You were doing something and somebody called and said, "Would you be interested in this?" But when you left TI, you didn't really have that. You just left with really no plan, right? So what was that like? How did your how was your faith maybe not tested, but maybe strengthened during that process of just saying, you know what, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know I don't feel like I need to be here anymore, and I trust that God's going to direct me to where He wants me to be. How did that
Yes.
process go?
I think about that all the time. It's amazing to just think back and see how God works in your life. And if whoever's watching, if you hadn't taken some time to just look back on your life and see how He's worked, I encourage you to do that, because it'll encourage you and it will strengthen you. I had some experiences that have really kind of opened my eyes spiritually. I was probably my faith was more of a works based faith for a long time, and I had been blessed to be a part of some things that kind of really opened my eyes to see how much more active God is in our lives, and how much more active the Holy Spirit is in our lives if we allow Him to be. And I was literally on a plane on my way to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and I got an email from my middle daughter telling me about her first soccer game that I had missed. And I'm sure the lady sitting next to me wondered what in the world was happening, because I mean, it overwhelmed me. And I knew right then at that moment, I had to do something. So when I got back from that trip, I talked to my wife, and we've had a number of these conversations through the years as we've made the changes. But she never doubted. She kind of get that look in her eye, like, uh, you have that look." But we always knew it was God. It was God working in us, and I think that probably played a bigger role in the growth of my faith than maybe I really realized, because I don't ever remember worrying. I will tell you, I took a stupid pay cut to make that change from a world's perspective, but looking back, we wouldn't trade it for anything, and I'd do it again in a minute.
So you spent quite a bit of time in public schools, and so much so that of all the different things you've done other than farming, and we'll kind of that's kind of a hobby slash passion slash lifelong thing, right? So we'll take that off the table. But of the other jobs you've done, that's the only one that you've left and went back to, right? So what was it about education that maybe drew you there to begin with? But then what made you decide to go back to? What about it was did you enjoy so much that you want, or maybe what? How did you feel like it was a way that you could serve? Maybe.
That's exactly what it was. I've always kind of tried to see whatever whatever it is I'm doing, never really have looked at it as a job. I've looked at it more so as, okay, that's my ministry. And to be in the trenches every day with those good-hearted teachers and those precious kids and those parents doing their best with what they have. There's so many opportunities to serve and to love on people. I think that's what always drew me to that. My grandmothers were teachers. My wife's a teacher. All three of my daughters are teachers. So it's been a family ministry for us. I think maybe probably a family calling even.
I second that. My wife is a school counselor, has been in education over about 20 years. And then my mom retired from teaching. My aunt retired from teaching. My brother's an ag teacher. His wife is a teacher. And I've got another cousins and stuff who are in education. One's who's in college, teaches at college. So I'm right there with you. That's kind of my family too. We're educators, I guess, by heart. And then there's a few of us that just get left out and do some other things. But as a whole, that's what most of them do. So public school stuff, you did that. What were some challenges working in the school system? And you did multiple different things because you taught and coached and then did administration stuff too. What were some of the challenges in there and maybe some leadership lessons that you learned during those years?
Sure. My sister and I were talking this morning about how often some of our greatest blessings or some of our greatest challenges, and you know, eh, I mean, you want to just swim in humanity, just go work in a public school at any level. Kids coming from all kinds of different places and situations. And I think as time goes on, there are just more and more challenges for families, and just navigating the variety of things that'll come up in a day at a public school. I mean, I logged a few of my days just for grins, and it's almost comical at what can come at you during the day at school. And I'll say this: as an administrator, you can usually kind of get up, take a walk, take a breath. Our teachers, they usually don't have that luxury. I've just always very much appreciated our teachers.
If you're watching online, if you see this, you'll see that there's a change of background here. Had the low battery, so we had to move from the beautiful bodark tree background to inside in the recliner. So we can feel
There you
bad
go.
for Don. He had to move to a very comfortable chair to finish our conversation.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah. So just some leadership lessons maybe you learned while you're at the school.
Oh yeah. I mean, the challenges are in leadership, there's usually somebody above you, unless you own the business or at the very top. There's usually somebody telling you what the objectives are and what the priorities are. And then you're left to deal with reality as far as, okay, where are my people? Where are they at? How are they doing? How do we accomplish these goals together? So, trying to put all that together and make that work for everybody is probably been the biggest challenge for me. In the education world, you throw in all that society's throwing at you, silly cell phones, and now and then you run into a parent who's really seeing things from a very different perspective than what the rest of people are. just working with the people and trying to accomplish what really matters the most together. Probably always going to be, in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges. We talked about faith a little bit. I was very blessed at both Bells and Whitesboro. I never had any issue. I was always careful not to push it, but kids are always going to be asking questions, and I always had an opportunity to let my faith be a big part of what I was doing there, and I think that helped a lot in my situation. That really helped a lot with those challenges.
Well, and your scripture tells us to be prepared to give an answer for why we have the faith that we do. And the good thing, like you said, in public education, you can't always go and just blurt that out. But if a kid comes and asks you a question, you can answer any questions they ask you, So,
Absolutely.
that's like with my wife, I know, and I know that's how Fellowship of Christian Athletes works and all those different opportunities that you have at schools because they're kind of student led, but then it gives adults who want to invest in them an opportunity to do that.
Amen. And I always had a Bible on my desk, and I can't count the times where I had a student in for disciplinary reasons, and they'd see that Bible and ask me about it, and that just led us to a place where it was way more about love than it was about discipline. And it's amazing how that will break down the walls and dissolve a lot of those things that we have such a hard time getting through when we're dealing with folks that are struggling and having trouble.
Yeah, and a lot of those kids who are there's sometimes people just make bad decisions all the time and almost can't help it, it seems like. But then there's a lot who the reason they're making a bad decision, the reason they're struggling and whatever it is because there's something else going on that a lot of times is way more important in their life than whatever the disciplinary thing is. There's something at home that is wrecking their life. And so when they come to school wrecked and they live out like they're a wrecked person.
Absolutely. That is so true. I've learned again in everything. I try not to ask what's wrong. I try to ask what happened. When people hear you approach it that way, then once they realize you're really trying to understand and help, it makes it so much easier. Whether they're 12 or 52, we all appreciate it when people listen. And yeah, so often our kids in schools, they're worrying about what happened when they left home, and they're worried about what's going to happen when they get home. Maybe the only meal they're going to get is at school, and it can get worse from there. It is tragic what so many of our kids, where they're coming from and what they're having to deal with, and just the ability to listen and try to understand that, I think is a key for everybody. Again,
I've been in student ministry now for 23. Well, I started in student ministry. I took a 5-year break, but overall ministry 23 years, and most of that's been as a youth pastor, in addition to being a firefighter. But through the years of that, I remember before I took my break, right, my 5-year break where I did other ministry things, still serving
yes,
church. Before that, I always felt like I had to be the cool guy. Like I went to the conferences to what's the lingo? What are the, all this stuff where you're trying to stay cool and relevant, for the kids. When I came back after a 5-year break, I was like, man, I don't even know the words they're saying now, like I haven't been around kids my kids were real little then. So I wasn't around teenagers a lot, except for passing them here and there in the church and stuff. And so I went back, and this goes to what you're saying. I think I went back and I just said, I don't know what else to do except teach the Bible and just love them. So I'm going to
yes,
do those two things.
yes,
Let them know that I care about them. My wife's always been there with me to help me and love on them and serve with me too. So we're going to do camps and we're going to do all that stuff that we can. I'm probably not going to be cool. If I try to be, I'm probably going to embarrass them and they're going to laugh at me, which happens on a regular basis, especially now that my kids are teenagers in the youth group. But just loving on them and sharing Jesus with them. And really, I'm in as far as our ministry, youth ministry, this is probably the most effective time of ministry I've had in my entire
yes.
23 years. And it's when I'm specifically not cool. I'm in my 40s. I'm not the cool young youth pastor anymore. I just show up and teach the Bible and tell them that I care about them, and
Yeah,
that makes a huge difference.
yeah, oh, it does. It's authentic. And I was thinking about this earlier this morning. Whatever it was I've been doing, I've always had lots of training, and Most of your training is going to be about X's and O's, on how to accomplish whatever the objectives are, whether it's teaching kids math and English, or whether it's building semiconductors, or whether it's, paving streets and building parks, and making sure we have police and fire departments that are okay. And I don't know that I ever recall getting much training on what you just described, and that is just being about the hearts of people. And for me, that's been the real key. And you just described it very well, is when we quit focusing so much on the logistics and the business of whatever it is we do, and we just try to be about people's hearts. I mean, those other things are important, but if we put people's hearts first, that just, well, it's love is what it is, and the world needs that. And it sounds so simple, but there's such a lack of it. And I think it works with kids, with grown-ups. We all need that. And when we can get to that place and people understand, okay, we can talk about all these other things, but how are you, and how can I help you as a person? And how can I help you with your relationship with Jesus? Those other things just kind of tend to fall in place quite often.
Yeah. So moving into the city, talk about that a little bit. What were some challenges that you faced? I know when you came in to the city of Sherman, when you came in to help with projects and city management kind of things, there were some struggles there. There's some challenges there. And part of the reason you came in is because I think part of that was they knew that you were a person that liked to bring people together and kind of a people person. And because you have that kind of, we've talked about that before, how you seek to love on people and to care about people. And you're a person who wants to bring people together to accomplish things. And so kind of talk through that and how that worked and some of the challenges that you had when you came to work at the city.
Yeah, yeah. That was a fascinating time. I came in. I think, if I remember right, we had reduced the tax rate by quite a bit, and there wasn't a lot of money, but there was still a whole lot of people that had a whole lot of expectations. So we were, yeah, the way I like to put it, we were kind of trying to make chicken salad out of feathers, and we did that for a number of years. So it was important to be efficient and very intentional with what we had. Probably one of the biggest challenges, what I was an older guy, but I hadn't been with the city long, so I had to learn some of the ropes as far as how municipal management works. But again, it where people involved, a lot of the things that matter the most are going to be the same things. But I think, again, over time, as whether it's citizens that are calling with complaints, or citizens calling with questions, or people coming to city council meetings, once folks understand that you really are trying to listen, you're really trying to help everybody understand each other, that goes a long way. And that can be a challenge at times, and sometimes it comes easy. But that's what I always tried to be about. I was blessed to work with some good folks. I remember having a conversation. Somebody had asked me what my management style was, and I guess I would describe it as servant leadership is the way I like to think about it. And I had quite a number of people that say that's just going to get you run over. And I've thought about that a lot. I've reflected on that a lot, and I suppose over time it has got me run over a time or two from a worldly perspective. But that's okay. So what? I get up and keep going, and I think for every time I've been run over, I think there are a multitude of times where God's blessed that with a much easier result, I guess. All part of the growth, but those times you get run over, I don't prefer those, but I know we learn from those too.
What kind of motivated you to leave city management and then go back to education? I know we kind of talked about that before, that you really felt like you could make an impact while you're working at the city for a while, but then it came to a point where you felt like that maybe with the time that you had left before you're going to retire, before you're ready to hang it up and go back to the farm again, right, for a while and go camping and
Mhm.
all that stuff that y'all like to do, where can I make the most impact with the time I have left? So kind of talk about that.
Sure. I'd kind of gotten I gotten to a point where I knew just physically and probably mentally and emotionally, I probably had another 5 to 10 good years in me. Because I've always been one to believe I didn't want to hang around and be one of those folks that people are like, I, I hope he's thinking about retiring soon. I mean, I want to give it all I got. And then once I know I'm not able to do that, then it's time for me to move on and do something different. But I just kind of had watched where our public education had gotten to. I know tons of teachers, a lot of them in my own family, and I just knew what they were going through. And I kind of felt like, you know what, I want to get back in the trenches with them and help as much as I can, just make a difference with the teachers and with the kids. And it just felt like that was the right way to finish out my working days, or my working days for pay anyway.
So speaking of finishing out your working days for pay, once you finally retired, right, from Whitesboro, it wasn't too long before the city came knocking again. And I'll tell this story from my perspective from the beginning. So we'd had a chaplain that had passed away. We had another chaplain that came in for several years who was a recently retired firefighter named Jesse, who I'm good friends with, and I love him to death. And he got to the point where he did it several years and then kind of was at a place where he felt like he wanted to be a little more free to do some stuff because he'd been at the city for 3 decades pretty much, and wasn't able to continue to give the way he wanted to because he had kids out and different things. And so we had a period where we didn't have one because they knew I'm a pastor. Chief Hartsfield and Chief Bowman, several of the admin staff had come and said, "Will you just fill in if we need something?"
Mm-hmm.
Until we get somebody. And I said, and I've done this before at churches before too, when I filled in for things. I said, I'll do it as long as filling in doesn't mean I'm it forever, because I've done that too.
Yes.
Fill in sometimes means you're it, for the foreseeable future instead of till we find somebody. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. Well, then after a few months, they said, we're not really finding anybody. So we keep doing it till we find somebody. And I said, again, as long as y'all are still looking to find somebody,
Mm-hmm.
I'll keep doing it. So that went on for probably about a year. It seemed like 6 months, maybe a year. And then he called me one day and said, hey, we've got somebody and he's on the phone. Would you like to just talk right here? And y'all were in the office together.
I
So
remember
shortly
that.
after that, we met. And so kind of talk us through that, how that conversation went when Chief Hartsfield had called you up. And I remember us talking. He talked to me later and said, and kind of told me how that went, but kind of walk us through your side of that.
Yeah. I mean, the thought of doing something like that, it really never even crossed my mind. But Chief and I, we had a relationship that went way back. I'd spent time together just talking about different things, leadership, faith. He called me and said, hey, here, like you said, we've been without and we need somebody. And I listened, and I told him, I said, let me think about it. Let me pray about it. And prayed about it, talked to my wife about it, thought about it. And I got to the point, I'm like, how do you say no to that opportunity? And as I tell the guys as I make the rounds and check on them at the station or wherever, they show up every day to serve people. They show up every day to help people, and I'm just blessed to have the opportunity to help with that in just a small little way. I say small little way. The spiritual well-being of our firefighters is a big deal to me, and I'm very humble and blessed to have that opportunity. I'm always wondering how I can do better, and I always feel like I'm not doing enough. But you do the best you can, and I've been very encouraged. That they've probably done me more good than I have them, but it's been a real blessing.
Well, we appreciate you. I appreciate you for sure because it's one more thing that I don't feel like I have to do. So I'm always when somebody else steps up to do something I don't have to do. But I've enjoyed the last several years too. Your friendship, getting to know you, and we've had several long talks. Spent when we went to IHOP the other day. You probably weren't planning on having a 3 hour conversation, but that's what it
Hey,
turned into. So
we
I
went with it.
appreciate you for
It's
that.
good stuff.
It was. I appreciate you for that, for always being there for that kind of stuff. You've jumped into this. It's hard to, like I said, it's hard to say no. But I think one thing that people who seek to lead, especially servant leaders, when they see an opportunity that they can meet a need, they feel led to do it. And instead of
Absolutely.
having that attitude that so many people have, and this is in church and organizations and school and everything, and every different organization, so many people have the attitude of somebody else can do that instead of I can do that. If it's something I can do, I will do it. If I can meet that need to help the church, the school, the organization, your family, whatever it is, so many people just don't step into that role. Why do you think that's important? Like what leads you? What leads people that do that? You think to do those things?
That's a great question. I think for me, when I stop and think about what God's done for me, I deserve none of it. And the sacrifice that He made, through the blood of Jesus, what He has given me, I don't know how we can really say no. And, I think sometimes we even need to say yes if we don't know if we can do it or not, just to be willing to get in there and to try. Man, it's so easy to get in our comfort zones and stay in our lanes and do the things that we're used to and the things that make us comfortable. Again, I go back. I try to think about Jesus and how He lived His life, and I don't recall many people asking Him for help when He said, "No, I don't know if I know how to do that, or I don't know if I have time, or probably somebody else could do it." He was just his response, I believe, was usually yes. However I can help you, I will. And I feel like I need to have that same kind of response as much as possible. Now, that can be a challenge, and I'm a human being, and I have my weaknesses and my shortfalls. I would guess most folks that say yes are somewhere on that same spectrum with me, knowing how blessed they are to be a child of God, and we need to share that, even if it costs us, even if it takes some sacrifice.
Even if you get run over a few times, right?
There you go. Getting run over is not all that bad. You learn from it and stuff.
And it's going to
Make
happen. I mean,
make you a little
it's going to
tougher,
happen to
man.
everybody.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, at some point. So, if you could give a piece of advice to a young leader, somebody who's just starting out and maybe they're not even in what they would view as a leadership role yet. Maybe they're in a support kind of role where they're going to try to lead, say lead from the bottom up or whatever it is. What would you say to somebody like that who maybe doesn't have authority but wants to lead, that feels called to lead in some way? What kind of advice would you give people like that?
I think the best piece of advice I would give, just looking back over all the years and all the different things, is just make your number one priority being about people's hearts. Now that's kind of a big umbrella, and it's a it's about you can't be about people's hearts without talking about your faith and about what Jesus can do for our hearts. But we so often want to jump into the business of the work, the X's and the O's, the objectives, the profit line, whatever it may be. But always make the hearts of your people your top priority, and then watch what God will do with that from there. Share your faith when you can, but I think if you just be about people's hearts, they see your faith without you having to say much. So I think that's what I would. When I was 20 years old or so, looking back, that's something I wish somebody had told me earlier in life. I was later on that I kind of figured some of that out. God put that on my heart. Um, I think I think that'll work just about anywhere you're at, uh, in just about whatever it is you might be doing.
I
It's
think you're right.
God's
I think,
way. It's
yeah,
God's design. It's God's plan for us. So I'm not coming up with anything new. It just trying to follow His lead.
I think that's great. That's great. Well, I also think that's a great place to end on. That's a great spot. So, Don, brother, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your friendship, for your investment in me over the last several years, because I've learned a lot from you, and I appreciate you. Thank you for your service to schools. Thank you for your service even to corporate America. Thank you for your service to the city of Sherman, where I'm employed as a firefighter too, and for continuing to serve as a chaplain, because this is the non-paid version of serving that you're doing now. We really appreciate you. So, Don, I want to thank you. Thank you again for being with us today. Thank you all for watching. Check us out next time on Call to Lead.
Thank you. Love you.